I'm Beck and welcome to a quick discussion about some romance tropes. I am just getting into the romance genre wholeheartedly and I've read a couple so far at the beginning of this year, and I thought I'd cover some tropes that I really am enjoying seeing and maybe you have some recommendations for me. So without further ado, the first trope that I want to talk about is grumpy sunshine, where one character obviously is very grumpy and gruff and doesn't say a lot, and then the other one is very energetic and positive thinking. And I found this trope very prevalent in a show that I loved recently, and that is Ted Lasso. I don't want to talk about the couple because it might be a little bit spoilery, but Ted Lasso was fantastic. All of the characters are brilliant, but a book that I saw the grumpy and sunshine trope in that I can remember from my recent reading is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey, and Piper is our main character in here, and she is definitely the sunshine character, and her love interest Brendan is that gruff, doesn't say a lot, standoffish character, and it doesn't mean that he treats her badly or anything. He still communicates with her, which I think is key, but he's just not very overt in the way that he presents his feelings. So to kind of get more vulnerability out of him, I think that's why I like the trope, because when you get someone being vulnerable enough to trust you and say more than they would normally say, that's when a relationship gets built. And that's what I especially enjoyed in this story, where we've got Piper being overzealous and very hyperactive and kind of trying to spin positive thinking, but when she falls back on her not having her, what they call her sparkle, that's when Brendan and the characters around her start to have kind of interventions and go, this is not the you that we're used to, like what's going on. So I really like the grumpy and sunshine trope, not just because it kind of pits two opposites and makes them get attracted to each other, but it also gives ground for great character development, which is something that I read books for. I love a good character, and if it's got a plot, that's great, but character is my first and foremost. Character is my ride or die. Before I move on from Grumpy and Sunshine though, I just want to mention one more thing, because even though Grumpy and Sunshine is something that I adore seeing in romance especially, it's actually worked across other genres. So just because it is only a romance trope doesn't mean that it can't work elsewhere, and I've seen it from memory in Alloy of Law and the Wax and Wayne series, and I see it in Wax and Wayne. So Wax is way more serious and then Wayne is a joker, and because he brings that lightness and that levity and that sunshininess to the story, it really balances Wax's seriousness. So I feel like that dynamic of the grumpy and sunshine could be non-romantic and still work, because it really worked in this series and I loved it. So anywhere that Grumpy and Sunshine is available, I am keen to read it. Then we've got Small Town, and I want to talk about the Bright Falls series by Ashley Herring Blake. This is a series that I've fallen in love with this year, and I've mentioned it in several videos so far, so if you haven't read it yet, please do. This is your sign. The first book is Delilah Green Doesn't Care, and I like the small town trope because it brings Delilah back to the small town of Bright Falls, where she's the photographer for her sister Astrid's wedding. She's coming back to this small town that she grew up in and doesn't have very great relationships with the people that she was growing up with there, because as a kid she experienced a lot of grief because her father passed away. So there is a lot of things entangled with her returning to this small town. And included in her return is Claire, who is one of Astrid's best friends, also one of the maids of honor, and that is who Delilah falls for in this book. So it's great to see those relationships revisited and examined, and because there is that tense and almost grieving aspect and realization on her being an adult and looking back to her childhood, I like the avenues of character development that going back to this small town kind of stoked for her from the fire. It kind of stoked those embers back to life and made her realize what she was thinking and feeling and how to heal from those things. So it also not only creates this space where everyone is a community, but it forces you to re-examine who you used to be if you've changed so much, which is why I really love this small town thing. And that's also probably why I really enjoyed the show Schitt's Creek, because all of these characters are super duper rich and then they go bankrupt and they move to this small town and they've got to assimilate with everybody, and that forces them to recognize the people around them and recognize themselves intermingling with that, and it really adds to their relationships and makes them almost respectable human beings, whereas before they were completely horrible. So it's nice to see that softening of character, and I really love it when characters are vulnerable. This also has a great friendship dynamic with the group of friends, and so it really linked nicely in with one of my other favorite tropes, which I see a lot over the fantasy genre, which is found family. And so the friends, I would definitely argue, are found family because they come together and support each other, which I also love. Then we've got another trope that might be a bit fraught because it is enemies to lovers. And I'm going to say that I don't love enemies to lovers, but I do love rivals to lovers, because I feel like there's less space in between where they hated each other. And if they were rivals, instead of hating each other, they would have just kind of wanted to bridge that gap and be better. It hits kind of differently the way I think about it. So I don't know if that's a universal thing or if enemies and rivals are kind of similar to you. Either way, I want to talk about Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail, because the romance in here is kind of rivals to lovers in a way. Maybe enemy territory at the beginning, given that Astrid bumps into someone at the beginning of this story and this person accidentally spills coffee all over her new outfit, and Astrid then loses her mind at this person. And so based on that interaction, that is what drives the beginning of the story, because these characters end up working together on this massive project that Astrid was dressed up for that morning when she walked out of the coffee shop. So it starts with fraught tension, but it ends in a beautiful way. So I really enjoyed that rivals dynamic, because it forces the characters to recognize things about themselves in relation to each other. It gives them a goal, and it's also just great for tension breaking between the characters in the scene. Like, you can feel almost the electricity between them. It's just a great reading experience, and I can't think of any enemies to lovers stories that I've read. Maybe more so as subplots in fantasy, but I can't think of them at the moment. Almost opposite to that trope now is friends to lovers, which I do enjoy as well. Often when a trope is done well and the characters actually communicate and recognize things about themselves that they need to communicate, that is when I love these tropes especially. Some of these books kind of got a grey area of the communicating part, so they're not all 5 stars for me, but I still enjoyed these for the most part. So the friends to lovers book that I want to talk about is Unnecessary Drama, which follows Brooke and Jessie, and Brooke is like 19, maybe 20, and she's living or just moved into this share house because she wants to start university soon. So she's just finished all of her exams for school. She's moved into this share house now because she wanted to live in Melbourne, which is, you know, in Australia. It's a book by an Australian author. And Brooke is realizing that her new housemate is not only Harper, who she applied to be a housemate with, but also a guy named Jesse. And Jesse is somebody that she went to school with, and when they were like 14, she had a massive crush on him. And something didn't go well in their childhood when they were growing up. And because she's got that memory and that anxiety attached to him, they became kind of enemies in a way, because when they were that young, they didn't know how to communicate properly. And so it all kind of became a bit of a storm in a teacup, like a big issue out of almost nothing. And so then now they're living together. And I like how living together when you used to be friends and now you're enemies, and then maybe becoming friends and then lovers again. It's just nice to see that kind of backstep into, no, we're not actually enemies. You know, that's kind of stupid. They've got to live together, so they've got no boundaries with each other. They're living in the same house, they use the same kitchen, and so they've got a different access to each other's lives than they did before. And they've obviously grown a lot more, and they actually talked, which was great. So I like that because they were friends before, coming into being in a romance together, they already knew each other quite well. And so when you leap into like the romantic gestures of romance, it doesn't seem that far-fetched because they already know each other. It's not like, oh, I've known this person 2 weeks and I love them. Like, that wasn't the case at all in here, which is just nice, and it makes it feel a little bit more realistic to me. Another great friends to lovers that I really enjoyed was Hook, Line and Sinker, which is the sequel to the Tessa Bailey book that I held up before, and that follows Piper's younger sister Hannah, and it also follows Brendan's best friend Fox. And all of these characters introduced in the first book, and now that we've had a bit of time after book 1, Hannah is coming back to Westport because she's part of this production that is filming a movie there. So because they've had this ground roots, and then it's been 7 months and they've been messaging each other since, they've become quite close friends. And so it's nice to have that basis of them knowing each other into their romance. And I would say something similar for The Charm Offensive, which is a male-male romance, which follows producer Dev and also the talent, the star of the show, Charlie. And Charlie is joining as like a Prince Charming because this is a reality show, kind of like The Bachelor, I guess, with all these women. And so they're trying to match him up with his true love. And Dev is like his handler. And because Dev is so intricately involved in Charlie's life with making the show, they get to see different sides of each other in terms of their mental health specifically, because Dev has depression and Charlie has OCD and anxiety disorder. So the way that they manage that gives each other a window into each other's lives and vulnerabilities, but they don't take advantage of it. They make space for each other and they talk to each other. And so they become friends, and that trust builds. And I just like the friends to lovers trope because there's already that trust established, and I like it when characters are really soft and vulnerable with each other. Then we've got a classic trope, which is only one bed, and that definitely features in here, and also in the Charm Offensive actually, in both. It's just a nice bit of an icebreaker and pushes people's boundaries because obviously they have to share space with each other, which leads into my next trope, which is forced proximity, and that also happened in Unnecessary Drama. So obviously Jessie and Brooke in this one are living together, so their proximity is forced, but because I say forced proximity, I don't like that implies no consent. Like, they are living in the same house, but they do discuss things and have their own space. So I think that's the important distinction. I like that there is space to move within this forced proximity, and with the only one bed trope, who doesn't love that, honestly? Like, the characters could be at the far ends of the bed and just like trying to sleep, but super hyper aware that the character that they have a crush on is awake on the other side. And so it just gets dark and they have a nice conversation, or one thing leads to another and it can get quite steamy. So I quite like the options for that trope. It kind of leaves it open to you, and anything that is said in that kind of soft, vulnerable state, obviously the characters are going to remember and then discuss later when they're not in that shared space. So it's just nice to, like I said, break the ice, but also to increase tension in a great and steamy way. I would also like to note that forced proximity is also featured in one of my favorite trilogies, and this is the third book, Act Your Age, Eve Brown. Am I okay? Act Your Age, Eve Brown. And this one follows Eve, who is trying to get a job, and so she goes to this like not entirely local Airbnb and she applies for a job there to be their chef. And from that, the love interest owns the Airbnb, and so they form kind of a relationship because she has to live at the Airbnb and then cook while she's there. And so the apartments that she's sharing kind of belong to the love interest, but they've got different rooms. So again, that forced proximity where you're, soft and vulnerable with your partner because you're around them all the time. And I really like what this proximity let the characters explore. So that's it. Those would have to be my key favorite romance tropes that sometimes appear across other things as well. Like, I've definitely seen only one bed used in fantasy before. So they're definitely tropes that can go across multiple genres, but when I see them in a romance, I am particularly excited by them. So let me know your favorite tropes down below. Let me know some recommendations if you've got any. I know I asked at the beginning, but I may as well ask again. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down in the comments below, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.